Isaiah, we had come down to looking at the historical background. And so I'm going to go through the first few dates that we talked about last week rather quickly. But Tiglath-Pileser, or oftentimes just referred to as Pul, came to power in Assyria in 745. In 740, we have the death of Uzziah. You also have in that same year the call of Isaiah, which we looked at, I think, last week, or maybe as a week before. But also, with the death of Uzziah, you also have Jotham becoming king. In 736, Ahaz becomes king, even though Jotham is still king, and we talked a little bit about that, the fact that one of the problems of dating the kings is the fact that they're co-regents. They reign together during a certain period of time. And so makes it difficult to determine, because how many years do they overlap? We might know how many years they reigned, but how many years were overlapping reign? In 733 and 732, you have the Syro-Ephraimitic War, or an alliance between them that is crushed by Tiglath-Pileser. He captures the city of Damascus, which was the capital city of Syria. And that becomes the background of Isaiah chapter 7 and chapter 8, and the background of that great prophecy of the virgin birth of our Lord. I think we mentioned the fact in 727 then, we have Shalmaneser coming to the Assyrian throne. And that would have been, of course, the death of Tiglath-Pileser. Then in 722, you have the fall of Samaria. Samaria is the capital city of the northern kingdom of Israel. Shalmaneser is the king, and thus it falls to him. This becomes the end of really the northern kingdom. They are taken off into captivity, and they never return as a nation. Sometimes, and we hear a great deal of talk by some individuals about the lost tribes of Israel. Were any of them lost? No, they were captured, but what happened to them? Well, you have some taken into captivity when Cyrus the Great in 536 BC gives the decree for people to return to Jerusalem. It is for all Israelites. It's not just for those of the southern kingdom, but it's all of them. And you also have at that time, and I'm going to have to quiet my watch. Thought I'd gotten that a while ago. You also have in the New Testament individuals who were of that northern 10 tribes. So they were not lost in the sense that it is used by many today, that those tribes were somehow lost and never to be found again. It is, if the phraseology can be used, they were carried into captivity and never returned as a nation. There are individuals who returned during the time of Cyrus and afterwards, but as a nation or as a whole, they did not. Of course, there are some religions today, the Mormons in particular, who rely upon this idea of the lost tribes of Israel, that somehow they made their way to the Americas. And thus you have a whole... What? And the Nephites, the Jaredites and the Nephites. And their journey here, the Lamanites, to the Americas is a study in ludicrousness. If you read their book, the Book of Mormon, God tells them to build this boat. I guess you would call it, if you look at a football, kind of like a shape of a football, round. And they are to then set sail, or they are toward this new land. They ask about breathing. Oh, well, you need a hole then in the boat or the ship. And so drill a hole in it. Well, what if that goes around and it gets to the bottom? We'll drill a hole in the opposite end as well. And as it goes from one to the other, you stop up one and open up the other. Now that's the Book of Mormon. That is the story of the Lamanites coming to the Americas. And that's why I say it is ludicrous. Anyone who would believe that. But as far as a kingdom, the northern kingdom of Israel ends at this point in time in 722. No, it was always a remnant. Even of the southern kingdom, it was a remnant. The majority of the people were killed. But the southern kingdom basically does return as a nation. That's the difference. The northern kingdom does not. The decrees dealt with building Jerusalem or the temple at Jerusalem, then building the walls of Jerusalem. But you never have that in relationship to the city of Samaria, which was the capital of the northern kingdom. So it's, as a nation, they did not return. Individuals, yes, because you have the records there in the New Testament of individuals who were of those other tribes. Okay, there. Also in 722, Sargon II takes the Assyrian throne. Shalmaneser, who is one who conquered northern kingdom, he dies, and now then Sargon II becomes king. In 716, as far as Israel or Judah is concerned, Hezekiah now becomes the king. And of course, he's one of the better kings of the southern kingdom. In 711, then, Sargon invades Philistia and takes Ashdod. This is what's in Isaiah chapter 20. So if you read Isaiah chapter 20, if you don't know these details, you kind of left out in the cold. That's why we go through these things, and so that it helps us understand, okay, what about when we get to Isaiah 20, what's he talking about? Well, he's talking about Sargon invading Philistia. And in invading Philistia, he takes Ashdod, which is one of the 5 principal cities of the Philistines. They have 5 I guess we would call them capital cities, their principal cities, and Ashdod was one of those cities. In 705, then, Sargon is murdered by his son, and he is succeeded by Sennacherib. And yes, murdered by his son. That was not all that uncommon during that time frame. The, should we say, family relations that we see today, far different then. They didn't think too much about murdering their own family members. So that's what you have here. But then Sennacherib takes over. In 701, he then attacks Judah and Jerusalem. This becomes the background of Isaiah chapters 36, 37, and 38. Those 3 chapters. Do you remember what takes place there? That's where they woke up, and 185,000 of them are dead. Well, that's true, but that's not what I was wanting. The 185,000 Assyrians wake up dead. And that's pretty much the way it puts it. I kind of get a laugh out of that one every time, but some of them are still alive, and they find 185,000 dead. So what happens? They return home. They leave and are not able to take Judah and Jerusalem. In this same year is when you have the sickness of Hezekiah. And you hopefully you remember those events in which Hezekiah is told, set your house in order, you're going to die and not live. He prays to God. God reveals to the prophet, go back in and tell him that he's going to live for 15 more years. So God extends his life based upon prayer. And I'll chase a rabbit here myself. In that story, you find a great lesson dealing with providence. Hezekiah's prayer, God extends his life. Was it miraculous? No, they got a poultice type deal, put it on the infection, it cleared it up, and he lived. Now, was God behind it? Absolutely. God was working, because God said, I'm going to extend your life 15 years, but it did not take a miracle in order to do it. He did it through natural means. There's your difference between a miracle and providence. Miraculous would have been miraculous healing like Jesus did in so many cases, but that's not what took place. There was the getting of that poultice and the applying it to that area, and thus the healing taking place. Okay, Dale.
But he did bring the shadow of the sundial back.
But that had nothing to do with the healing.
Yeah.
So that's the point that I'm making. Yes, there was a miracle to let him know that, yes, your life is being extended. And moving the hands of the clock backwards, basically. But that had nothing to do with the healing.
That was a good advantage, I would think. You knew you only had 15 more years. You could get everything straight and be sure you walked a straight and narrow. That would be an encouragement to me.
That would be Some would take it the opposite way, though. Since I have 15 years, I can waste 14 of them and do whatever I want to and get things right at the 15th. Now, that's how some evil people would think. But that's not the way, of course, that Hezekiah viewed it. Yes, he continued to live right.
Proverbs 1 says that doesn't work. You take time to read Proverbs 1:24 and following. It doesn't work.
Okay, Dale. Well, the thing is, if he has 15 years, it would. He knows that he has 15 years. That's what God has stated. You have 15 years. So, but as a result of his sickness, the Merodach-Baladan, who is the Babylonian king, sends an emissary to Hezekiah, and because of his sickness and his healing, he shows them everything in his house. And God basically tells him after the fact that was a mistake. And as a result of that, while it's not going to happen to you later on, you're going to go into Babylonian captivity. Why? Because you showed them all of these riches that you have in your house, and they're going to have that desire to want them. So, thus, you have that playing out in 701, at least when the sickness takes place. In 681, then Sennacherib. Now, who was Sennacherib? He's the one who had attacked Judah and Jerusalem. And he's murdered by his sons. And then Esarhaddon, a third son, becomes king. And you notice that plural, he's murdered by his sons. There's two of them that are involved in that murder. And so a third son, Esarhaddon, then becomes king. So again, you have real good family situations, don't you? So that's some historical background. Next thing I want to deal with is the political conditions during this time frame. And first, we're going to deal with Egypt. And I'm going to read some quotes in relationship to these because it's easier to go through and read them than me trying to explain all of them, probably taking a whole lot longer period of time. In the book Times of Isaiah, the man who wrote it was Sayce, and I have several quotes from him actually in regards to these things, but he writes first, during this time, Judah had become the battleground of two great powers of the ancient world, Assyria and Egypt. Like the iron upon the anvil, therefore, Judah lay between two hostile forces, one of which, Assyria, was burning with the youthful fires of enterprise and lust of conquest, while the other, Egypt, still remembered its former glories and the empire it had wielded in Asia. I should have gotten a map. And you have, if you can think of, and I think of it as a horseshoe, because that's to a great extent what it is. Up at the top, just above the top of the horseshoe, and the horseshoe actually representing the Macedonian Sea, you would have Assyria. Down below the horseshoe, you would have Egypt. Right in the middle, you have Palestine. So here's Assyria coming to power. Egypt has been a world power for a long time. And now then Assyria is wanting to come down, and guess where they meet? Boom, right in the middle, or right in Palestine. So that's kind of the situation, because they are two of the great powers of that day. And they are doing battle. And the battle takes place in Palestine. Later he writes, at the end was put to this condition of things, that is, division in Egypt in the middle of the 8th century, by the Ethiopian king Shashbaka, or Sabeko. He is the So of the Old Testament, 2 Kings 17:14, whom Hoshea had bribed to help him against the Assyrian monarch. And that So is in the Old Testament S-O, just like our word so. But he is the Sabeko, S-A-B-A-K-O, or Shabaka, S-H-A-B-A-K-A. He's the Ethiopian king. So now then you have Ethiopia a little bit farther over from Egypt. And here's Hoshea bribed So to help him against the Assyrians. Egypt at that time was, since now then middle of the 8th century, they had basically divided. So now then you start seeing the condition of Egypt a little bit. They were a great power. Now then they are being divided. And so they have become weakened in their fight or their national aspect. Then upon the death of Sabako's, or So's, successor, who reigned only for a short time, Tirhakah. I love these names. That's Tirhakah, who is Sabako's brother-in-law, began to reign. Because Egypt feared the growing power of Assyria, they started to meddle in the politics of Palestine. You know, if they can get Palestine on their side, or they can get Palestine to where they have a hatred for the Assyrians and they're going to fight against the Assyrians, it would help protect them. So you have that situation coming up. Thus, Tirhakah also sought to form a league against Assyria in Palestine with Jerusalem, as it said. In this, he was successful. That's Isaiah chapter 30. Then the battle between Sennacherib and Tirhakah, then the loss of the 185,000 Assyrians against Jerusalem. Both claimed the victory. That's both Egypt and Jerusalem claimed the victory. But Sennacherib went home. And the problem was Tirhakah, king down here in Egypt, he was too weak to follow up the Assyrians' loss. If he would have been strong enough, he would have been able to go on up into Assyria and to have destroyed them, but he wasn't. He was weak. And the nation of Egypt was weak at this time, and so they couldn't really do anything, even though Here's Assyria, devastated to a great extent as far as their military, with 185,000 people dead, who woke up dead. Then you have Assyria. In this, and we'll go through their kings, I mentioned Tiglath-Pileser, also referred to as Pul, comes to power in 745 BC, and he rules to 727 BC. Tiglath-Pileser was a military adventurer who seized the throne of Assyria. So it wasn't just something he gains, he takes control of it militarily. He was a man of great character or great ability, had a very forceful character. Stated that, quote, he excelled as a commander. He equally excelled as an administrator and civil organizer. Under him, the Assyrian army became once more the scourge of the surrounding nations. Nothing could resist it, end quote. You don't find a man who generally is a great military commander, a great administrator, and civil organizer all rolled up into one. And yet that's the way Tiglath-Pileser was. Dale?
Isn't he the one that imported terror publicly by stacking heads outside city walls as an object lesson to intimidate others that would oppose him?
I think several. I think that was a common practice, actually.
In addition
To say that he did it, I don't know. But it was something that it was common. They would stack up heads, and here's all of the defeated people. It would.
did that too?
I would say a lot of them did it. But Tiglath-Pileser began thus with his capabilities building the Assyrian Empire, partly by military conquest, and then the conquering, or placing those who were conquered under one civil law, and also recognizing the one God, Ashur, A-S-S-U-R. So you had to recognize this one God. There was one civil law. He's basically trying to eliminate any nationalistic views of a nation. I've conquered you. You're now going to be ruled by our law, and you're going to have to worship our God. He carried away all of northern Israel in 734 BC. Now then, the capital city of Samaria was not overthrown till 722, but Pul comes down and he basically ravages the entire area. Next came Shalmaneser V, 727 to 722. And there's not a great deal to say about him, but next comes Sargon in 722 and ruled to 705 BC. He actually succeeded Shalmaneser V during the siege of Samaria. So here they were surrounding Samaria. It's under siege. Shalmaneser V dies. Sargon becomes king. Let me also add something here, because reading about these different kings becomes very confusing, because not only do they have this, for example, Shalmaneser V, for example, that one, I'm not sure he is this way, but sometimes they are called, instead of the fifth, maybe the third. It's the same person. Which one is it? Well, it's the same one. Yet you've got it in one place, the fifth, and another place, the third. It makes it very confusing. So understand that if you ever start reading these history books regarding these things. But with Sargon, he succeeded Shalmaneser V, and he brought about the eventual fall of the city of Samaria, capital city of Israel. Even though Pul had ravaged the area as a whole, you still had the capital city there standing. Well, Sargon takes care of that. And thus the rest of Israel that had not been carried away under Pul is now being carried away into captivity. In 705, Sennacherib becomes king and reigns through 681 BC. Judah, southern kingdom, joined a coalition against Assyria led by Tyre and Egypt. So as I say, here's these two competing nations, powerful nations, Egypt and the Assyrians. Well, now then the Egyptians had gotten Tyre, and now then Judah to join with them against Assyria during this period of time. In 701, Sennacherib, the son of Sargon, then invaded Palestine. You would read about this in 2 Kings chapter 18 and verse 13 through chapter 19 and verse 37. It's also the background of Isaiah chapters 36, 30, and 37. During that time, 46 cities were sacked and thousands of prisoners were taken during that period of time. God, however, delivered Jerusalem by killing the 185,000 men. Sennacherib then, because of that, returns home and is soon assassinated by two of his sons. Esarhaddon then becomes king in 681 to 669 BC. He's the third son of Sennacherib, as we mentioned earlier. And Sayce wrote, as a military commander, he was in no wise inferior to his grandfather Sargon. As a civil administrator, he proved himself the best of the Assyrian kings. So he was the best of the Assyrian kings as far as civil administration, but he was also a good military commander as well. Israel, the northern kingdom, of course. Under the long and prosperous and idolatrous reign of Jeroboam II. Jeroboam II reigned from 790 to 749 BC. During that time, Israel had enlarged her borders, was outwardly rich. Now, inwardly, they were corrupt, idolatrous, wicked, evil, and you can string probably a lot of other synonyms together, and that would well describe them. Since they did not heed God's warnings that was sent by the prophets, God ultimately destroyed them by the Assyrians with the fall of Samaria in 721, 722 BC. Now then, I think in that which I gave you as a handout, it shows that the contemporary kings during Isaiah's time, Jeroboam II, Zechariah, who only reigned for 6 months, Shallum, who reigned for 1 month, Menahem, who reigned from 752 to 741, Pekahiah, 741 to 739, Pekah, 739 to 731, and Hoshea, 731 to 722. And with Hoshea, he is the last of the kings of Assyria. Or Israel and Samaria. Judah then. During the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, and Ahaz, idolatry, wickedness, and oppression abounded. Corruption was rampant in Judah. The good king Hezekiah, though, listened to God's prophet Isaiah and made the reforms that were necessary to save Jerusalem. And of course, there we have the divine intervention of the 185,000 Assyrians dying. And as we mentioned, you can read about this in 2 Chronicles 29, also Isaiah 36 and 37. Hezekiah cleansed the temple, restored the true worship of God. He reinstated the Passover, along with a lot of other reforms that he made. The contemporary kings of Judah during Isaiah's time you would have Uzziah, also called Azariah, 767 to 740. Jotham, 750 to 732. He was co-ruler with Uzziah for a period of about 10 years or so. Ahaz, 736 to 726. He was a co-ruler with Jotham for a few years. Then you have Hezekiah, 716 to 696. And then Manasseh, 696 to 642. So that's kind of the contemporary or the national situations, the political conditions during this time frame of Isaiah. But also wanted to look at the political parties in Judah. Okay, Dale.
Do you remember the close to ballpark figure of the date of Isaiah's death?
I go back to my notes, and because we covered that before.
Okay, don't worry about it.
About 690 BC. The political parties in Judah now. This is dealing with Judah, but you had the Egyptian party. We're going to deal with basically 3 parties. Probably not finished tonight, but the Egyptian party. Because of the fear of the Assyrians, they're becoming stronger. And thus, here in Judah, they're afraid of the Assyrians. And it was believed that Egypt was just as powerful as the Assyrians. Thus, a lot of people, there was an Egyptian party that wanted to make alliances with Egypt. And so you have an Egyptian party. There were numerous ones in Jerusalem that wanted to join with Egyptians. Sayce wrote that they urged the necessity of looking to Egypt for support and of resisting the attack of the Assyrians with the Egyptian help. So in other words, we're afraid of the Assyrians up here in the north, so what can we do? Well, we're not strong enough ourselves to defeat them. Let's go down here to Egypt and get them to help us out. So that's one party. Then a second party was the Assyrian party. So now then, while there was the Egyptian party, because they're afraid of the Assyrians, you have the Assyrian party. They were opposed to the Egyptians, as were the Assyrians. And so they advocated submission to the all-powerful empire of the Assyrians. So the Assyrians, they're more powerful, they're stronger, so let's just bow to them, and whatever they say, whatever they want, we'll do. Now, can you start seeing a problem in Jerusalem? Two warring parties, exactly the opposite view from each other. That's what you have in Jerusalem. But wait, there's a third party, and that is a nationalistic party. And Sayce puts it, a third party, which we may call national, was headed by Isaiah. Its policy was a policy of non-intervention that was opposed to an alliance with Assyria or Egypt. End quote. Don't run down here to Egypt for help. Don't run up to the Assyrians for help. Here we are, we do it ourselves.
Who was the one that called Egypt broken reed? Was it Isaiah or Jeremiah or who?
Egypt would have been Isaiah. Jeremiah, Egypt wasn't much considered at that time. This nationalistic party led by Isaiah realized that Judah's safety lay in the hands of God and not in these nations round about them. Notice what we said Isaiah's name meant. Anyone remember? Jehovah saves. That was the message to Jerusalem. Jehovah saves, not Assyria, not Egypt. God is the one who saves. And so that's it. Safety does not reside in these nationalistic alliances, military alliances. Safety lay in God's hands. And so if you reform your life, then God will take care of you. If you make the proper changes within the nation, don't have to worry about these competing nations. So we'll stop there, and next week we'll deal with the unity of the book, and then actually probably get into the book itself, maybe.